At first it might seem small. They borrow something without asking. They dismiss your discomfort with a joke. They show up unannounced, interrupt your alone time, or pressure you into saying yes when you clearly said no. And maybe you give them the benefit of the doubt because that's what empathetic people do, right? You assume they just didn't understand, or maybe you didn't express yourself clearly enough. But over time, you notice a pattern. You explain your limits, and they keep ignoring them. You express your feelings, and they twist them into your fault. You try to hold the line, and somehow end up apologizing. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a manipulation tactic. People who care about you will adjust when you express discomfort. They might not get it perfectly the first time, but they'll listen, reflect, and try. Because boundaries are not about control. They are about respect. But someone who wants to undermine you, whether consciously or not, won't respect your boundaries because your boundaries are a threat to their control. When you start to say, "This is where I end," and you begin, they take that as rejection. Or worse, a challenge. So they push, they test you with small boundary breaches. And when you don't react, they push a little more. They make it about them. You used to be more open. You've changed. I guess I can't say anything around you anymore. You see how it works. Suddenly you're defending your right to have limits. You're walking on eggshells in your own emotional house. And slowly, quietly, you start to disappear. But here's the truth no one tells you: your boundaries don't need to be justified to be respected. You don't need to be right to deserve peace. And someone who truly loves you won't take your no personally. They'll see it as a way to know you more deeply. Boundary violations aren't always loud. They often come cloaked in concern, humor, even love. But the real red flag, when you start to feel like setting limits, is an act of rebellion. When self-respect starts to feel like punishment. When your ability to say "this hurts" is met with anger, guilt-tripping, or emotional withdrawal. That's when you know this isn't about communication, it's about power. And you're dealing with someone who doesn't want connection, they want control. Let me know if you'd like this to continue, or if you'd like the next keynote expanded too. Absolutely, here's an expanded, full-length version of Keynote 2. They use your vulnerabilities as weapons. Let's talk about trust for a second. Because trust isn't just built on good behavior, it's built on safety. And when you open up to someone, when you share your fears, your insecurities, your painful memories, you're offering them something sacred, your soft spots. You're saying, "Here's where it hurts. Please be gentle." And the people who love you, they hold those moments like fragile glass. They never throw them back at you, never twist them, never use them to win. But someone who wants control, someone whose intentions are more destructive than caring, they do. They listen carefully, not out of empathy, but out of strategy. They take mental notes. They file away the things that make you hesitate, break, second-guess yourself. And they weigh. At first, they might even seem supportive. They might say things like, "You're safe with me. I'd never hurt you. You can tell me anything." And maybe, for a while, you believe them. You open up about your anxiety, your fear of abandonment, your childhood wounds, and in that moment, they seem kind. But here's the thing, people who want power are very good at seeming kind. Until something shifts. Maybe you disagree with them. Maybe you start to stand up for yourself. Maybe you just begin to grow. And suddenly, the very things you confided in them about, the things you shared in moments of raw honesty, become ammunition. They start saying things like, "No wonder your last relationship didn't work. This is just your anxiety talking. Like always, you're being dramatic, just like your mum." And the worst part, doesn't even have to be in a fight. Sometimes it's in a joke, a subtle dig, a passive-aggressive comment said in front of others. They'll call it teasing, but what they're really doing is cutting you down with the blade of your own truth. It's not an accident, it's emotional sabotage, and it is one of the clearest signs that you're not safe with this person. Not emotionally, not mentally, not relationally, because someone who uses your wounds to win an argument, to shame you, or to make you feel small, doesn't love you. They love what you give them, your openness, your empathy, your loyalty, until those things start working against their control. And here's what's tricky. This doesn't always look explosive. It can be quiet, calculated. They'll hurt you in ways you can't easily prove. So you start to doubt yourself. You start thinking, maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I'm overreacting. But let me say this clearly. You are not too sensitive. You are not overreacting. You are finally recognizing a pattern of emotional betrayal. And the first step to breaking free is realizing that someone who truly loves you will protect your vulnerability, not weaponize it. Or would you like this part adapted into a post, story, or video format too? Their empathy is selective and strategic. Some people are incredibly good at reading emotions. They can mirror your pain, say all the right things, nod at the right times, cry with you if needed. And if you've been hurt before, it's easy to mistake that emotional fluency for emotional integrity. But here's the truth that's hard to admit. Not everyone who seems empathetic actually cares. Some people use empathy like a tool, not to connect, but to control. You see it when they show up for you, but only when it benefits them. They'll comfort you when they want something. They'll play the supportive partner when it helps their image. They'll be incredibly compassionate when people are watching, but behind closed doors, their tone shifts. Their support vanishes the moment you need them in a way that's inconvenient. They'll say things like, "You're always so negative. Why are you making such a big deal out of this? Other people have it worse." Suddenly the person who once made you feel seen makes you feel like a burden. That's because their empathy wasn't real. It was performative. It existed only when it reinforced their role as the good one, only when it gave them the upper hand in the power dynamic. And here's how you can tell the difference. Real empathy is consistent. It's there when things are messy. It's there when you're not at your best. It doesn't disappear when you push back or when you're no longer useful. But manipulative empathy is conditional. It disappears when your needs threaten their control. It dries up the moment your pain becomes inconvenient. And this kind of behavior is especially dangerous because it masks abuse as affection. It confuses your instincts. It makes you feel guilty for having needs. It teaches you to perform your pain in palatable ways so that they'll respond. But what kind of connection is that? Someone who truly cares doesn't need you to shrink for them to show up. They don't require an audience to treat you with kindness. They don't selectively switch off empathy like a light. So if you're stuck in that cycle, if you're constantly wondering, why do they only care when it suits them? Trust what you're feeling. You're not imagining the inconsistency. You're experiencing a form of emotional manipulation that hides behind sweet words and well-timed sympathy. And the more you excuse it, the more it trains you to stay quiet, to stay small, and to doubt your reality. But you deserve better than performance. You deserve someone who shows up the same way when the cameras are off. Someone whose love isn't based on how useful, agreeable, or impressive you are in the moment. Would you like me to go right into Keynote 4 next? Or break this into a mini-series of social content? E.g. to the empathy illusion as a video, post, or reel. They isolate you subtly. When we think of isolation, we imagine someone cutting you off from the world, locking you away, yelling at you not to see your friends, deleting numbers from your phone. But most of the time, that's not how it starts. With someone truly manipulative, isolation doesn't come through force. It comes through suggestion, through little moments of doubt, through slow, almost invisible shifts that separate you from the people and parts of yourself that kept you grounded. At first, they might say things like, "I don't think your friends really get you. Your family's kind of toxic, don't you think? You're different now, like in a good way. But maybe you've outgrown them." And it sounds harmless, even thoughtful. You might start to question your other relationships. You might begin to think they're right. And that's the goal. Because if they can slowly weaken your connections, you'll have fewer outside voices reminding you of who you are, fewer people giving you perspective, fewer lifelines. And that's exactly how they keep you close, by making themselves the only voice that matters. And here's the thing, they don't even need to say, "Don't see them." All they need to do is react subtly. Maybe they sulk when you mention making plans with someone else. Maybe they get distant when you're excited about something that doesn't involve them. Maybe they start tiny arguments before you leave the house, so you show up drained instead of happy. And so you start to shrink your world without even realizing it. You cancel plans more often. You share less with others. You start thinking, "It's just easier this way." That's not easier. That's isolation. And the most dangerous part, you think it was your idea. You think you're being mature or loyal or just focusing on the relationship. But let's be clear. A healthy relationship never asks you to cut yourself off from your support system. It never leaves you feeling like your circle is getting smaller and smaller while your anxiety grows louder and louder. Someone who genuinely loves you will want to expand your life, not shrink it. They'll celebrate your friendships, encourage your independence, and never punish you for being connected to others. But someone who wants control, They know that the more isolated you feel, the easier you are to influence. They want to be your everything, not because it's romantic, but because it's strategic. This kind of subtle isolation can be hard to spot because it wears the disguise of love, but love should feel like freedom, not like a fortress. Love should open doors, not close them. If you've been slowly disappearing from your own life, start asking who benefits from that and who's been quietly pulling the strings. Or should I shape this one into a story post or script version for video/voiceover? You're always the one to blame. You know that feeling where something goes wrong and somehow, it always comes back to you? It starts small, they forget an important date, and instead of apologizing, they say, well, you've been distant lately. I didn't think you'd care. They raise their voice, and when you flinch, they say, if you didn't push me like this, I wouldn't have to react that way. It becomes a pattern. Their mistakes are your fault. Their moods are your responsibility. Their behavior is a reaction to your flaws. And before you know it, you're in a constant state of self-correction, always second-guessing, tiptoeing, editing your words, minimizing your needs just to avoid setting them off. This isn't accountability. This is emotional gaslighting disguised as relationship dynamics. They've built a world where they are never the cause of harm, only the victim of your overreactions, your tone, your timing, your emotional instability. And the more you try to explain yourself, the worse it gets. Why? Because it's not about solving a problem. It's about preserving their ego. If they can keep you in the wrong, they never have to reflect, never have to grow, never have to say, I messed up, that was on me. And that's the danger. Over time, you begin to internalize their blame. You start to believe maybe you are too sensitive. Maybe you do expect too much. Maybe you do need to change. And the more you shrink yourself to fit their narrative, the more powerful they become. They'll even flip your pain into an accusation. If you cry, you're being manipulative. If you get angry, you're aggressive. If you go silent, you're punishing them. In their world, your reactions are always the problem, and their actions are always justified. But let's pause here. Healthy people own their impact. Even when their intention wasn't to hurt, they don't hide behind it. They say things like, that wasn't okay, and I'm sorry. I see how I contributed to this. Tell me how I can do better. They don't require you to present your pain in a perfectly calm tone for it to be valid. But someone who always flips the script, someone who never accepts responsibility, who never says sorry unless it's performative, who makes you feel guilty for being human, that's not a partner. That's a mirror designed to show you only your flaws, never theirs. So if you find yourself constantly apologizing, constantly self-blaming, constantly wondering if you're the toxic one, stop. That's not clarity, that's conditioning. You are not the villain for having boundaries. You are not wrong for having needs. And you are not to blame for someone else's refusal to grow. Let me know if you're ready for, or if you'd like this one styled as a video monologue, quote, carousel, or IG caption. They drain you, then call you too much when you break this one. It's quiet. It creeps in slowly. You start the relationship full of light, hopeful, giving, maybe even a little relieved. Finally, someone who sees me. You show up with your heart open, your energy full, your love ready to pour. You give and give and give, because that's what you do. But little by little, that energy starts to vanish. Not all at once, not in a dramatic movie scene kind of way. No, this is the kind of exhaustion that builds in the background, like a slow leak in your spirit. You start to notice that after every conversation, you feel a little more depleted. You start to dread interactions you used to look forward to. You feel emotionally thinner. And when you finally speak up, when you finally say, I'm not okay, they don't respond with care. They respond with defensiveness. They say, you're always so emotional. Why do you always make things heavy? Maybe you're just too much for me. But they weren't saying that when they needed you to listen to their chaos at 2 a.m. They weren't calling you too much when you were their biggest source of comfort. They weren't tired of your depth when it was serving them. This is the heartbreak of being emotionally extracted and then shamed for needing replenishment. You gave them a soft place to land, and they gave you a cold place to fall. And the worst part? You start to believe them. You start to think maybe you are too much, too sensitive, too dramatic, too needy. You start to water yourself down just to keep the peace. You silence your voice to protect their ego. And what used to feel like love now feels like emotional labor, with no paycheck, no break, and no thank you. But here's the truth. You're not too much. You're just too awake. For someone who benefits from your silence, Too honest for someone who's addicted to illusion. Too real for someone who only knows how to take. The people who love you won't drain you and discard you when you finally need to be held. They won't disappear when you show emotion. They won't label your breaking point as drama. They'll ask, how did it get this far? They'll say, let's talk. They'll meet you halfway. Because love doesn't just show up when you're strong. It sits with you when you're shaking. It hears you when your voice is trembling. It sees too much and says you are exactly enough. If you're ready, we can move into the 6 rules on how to emotionally detach from someone who's draining or destroying you next. Want me to keep the same deep, real tone for that too? Absolutely. Is a powerful, emotionally grounded conclusion that ties together all 6 keynotes and sets the tone for healing and emotional detachment. You're not crazy. You're waking up. Here's the part no one talks about. The people who hurt you the most aren't always loud about it. They don't always yell, cheat, or slam doors. Sometimes they smile while they silence you. They hug you while they drain you. They say, I love you, while slowly tearing down your sense of self. And that's why it's so confusing. That's why it takes so long to leave. Because you keep hoping that the version of them you saw in the beginning, the kind, thoughtful, attentive one, is the real one. And maybe it was, but what matters more is the one they are consistently. So if your gut has been whispering, this doesn't feel like love anymore, listen. If you find yourself exhausted, isolated, blamed, gaslit, and emotionally bankrupt, this isn't your fault. But it is your signal. You're not broken for finally seeing the truth. You're not cold for needing to pull away. You're not bitter for setting boundaries. You're healing. The truth is, some people don't come into your life to love you. They come to feed off your love. And once you run out, they move on. But not you. Not this time. This time you recognize the signs. This time you name the patterns. This time you start the process of emotional detachment. Not out of hate, but out of self-respect. Because real love shouldn't cost you your peace. Real connection won't make you disappear inside yourself. And the right people, they won't just feel like relief, they'll feel like home. Let me know when you're ready for the 6 rules on how to emotionally detach. We can dive in deep with the same tone, or I can shift it into a more empowering, direct voice depending on how you want it to land.